So friends, given how today's oral arguments played out in the Supreme Court on the issue of whether somebody who engaged in insurrection should be allowed to hold office again in the future, given how those arguments unfolded, today was a rough day. It was a rough day for the rule of law. It was a rough day for the sanctity of our vote. It was a rough day for justice. But let's talk about it, because justice matters. Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. Well friends, I listened to the live stream of today's Supreme Court arguments on the issue of whether Donald Trump should get to be president again, whether he's disqualified under the 14th Amendment, which disqualifies insurrectionists from holding office, whether he should be disqualified, as a Colorado trial court judge ruled after a trial on the merits, and as the Colorado State Supreme Court affirmed that yes, Donald Trump engaged in insurrection and is therefore disqualified under the very terms of the Constitution. Today's oral argument was all about whether the Supreme Court justices agreed with that, with the Colorado courts and with the express language of the Constitution. And today, listening to that oral argument, today was not a good day. Not a good day for justice. Because as you listened to all of the justices pose questions of the attorneys, the parties, it was clear the justices were putting details over democracy. The justices focused on things like semantics. What are the differences between words like office and officer and office holder? The justices focused on their concern that keeping Donald Trump off the ballot would potentially disenfranchise voters. But they expressed no concern whatsoever that the crimes Donald Trump committed were designed and intended to disenfranchise 80 million voters. They expressed concern that if the states were allowed to run their own elections and qualify or disqualify potential candidates, if they were allowed to run their own elections precisely as the Constitution gives them the power and authority and responsibility to do, states run their own elections, including elections for federal office. That's why we have 50 different batches of laws and regulations, each state promulgating its own. That's the constitutional construct. And the justices expressed concern that, well, if the states were allowed to run their own elections and qualify and disqualify candidates, there would be all these inconsistencies. Inconsistencies, I think one justice said, maybe inconsistencies bordering on chaos. And yet, what did the Supreme Court do a little over a year ago when they revoked women's constitutional privacy rights over their own reproductive health decisions and sent all of that back to the states? What do we now see? Inconsistencies, dramatic inconsistencies, inconsistencies bordering on deadly chaos like in states such as Texas. But that didn't seem to be a concern when they were revoking women's constitutional privacy rights. But today, many of the justices were so concerned with the inconsistencies that would result if the states got to do what the Constitution gives them the right to do, which is run their own elections, including qualifying and disqualifying candidates. But friends, do you know what my main concern, my main complaint, my main beef is with what unfolded in that courtroom today? Nobody pushed back on the fact, on the reality, that Donald Trump engaged in insurrection. Nobody seemed to quibble with that. Nobody seemed to dispute the Colorado trial court finding that Donald Trump engaged in insurrection, or the Colorado Supreme Court affirmation of that finding that Donald Trump engaged in insurrection. No surprise, right? We saw much of it with our own eyes. Allow me a very brief recap. Donald Trump recruited the foot soldiers of the insurrection. Hey, Proud Boys, stand by. He set the date for the Capitol attack. Come to D.C. on January 6th. Will be wild. He ginned the crowd up into an angry frenzy. If you don't fight like hell, you won't have a country anymore. He was informed by security that there were people in the crowd, his crowd, that were armed with firearms, and he said, I don't care. They're not here to hurt me. Take down the effing mags, the metal detectors, let them in, and then we can all march to the Capitol together. So he knew that this would be not just an attack on the U.S. Capitol and on the electoral vote count, on the transfer of presidential power. It would be an armed attack. And then he told them all to march to the Capitol and stop the certification. He said, stop the steal. And they did. They marched to the Capitol and violently stopped the certification. And while the assault on the Capitol was in progress, Donald Trump refused to call it off for hours. People streamed into the dining room just off the Oval Office, begging and pleading with him, including family members, to call off the attack, and he wouldn't. Instead, he sent out an incredibly incendiary tweet. Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what he needed to do. In other words, to keep me in power. The message was sent. Get him. Get him. And get him, they tried to do with chance of hang Mike Pence breaking out. At the end of it all, he pledged love and pardons to the insurrectionists, and he is continuing to deny the election's results to this day. I would argue he's still engaging in insurrection. Of course, Donald Trump engaged in insurrection, and running through today's argument was the acknowledgement that everybody seemed to agree that Donald Trump engaged in insurrection. So what does that mean? What are the consequences under our Constitution of somebody who engaged in insurrection? It can be found in 14.3. No person shall hold any office under the United States who, having previously taken an oath to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in insurrection. Donald Trump is disqualified by the plain language of the Constitution. He is disqualified. But today, the justices lost sight of the big picture, of the constitutional picture. And instead, they put details over democracy. And that is a damn shame. Because justice matters. But friends, we fight on. As always, please stay safe. Please stay tuned. And I look forward to talking with you all again tomorrow.